He took the pain to protect the enemy's child. Now the alien mother wants him back. HFY the planet Kelara was scarred and broken. Vast plains of metal rubble stretched as far as the eye could see, interspersed with craters that had been carved out by long-forgotten explosions. Fires burned here and there, casting an eerie orange glow against the ash-filled skies. The war between humans and the Tharka had raged for decades, leaving almost nothing untouched. Even the wind seemed heavy with the memory of countless battles, carrying with it the faint metallic tang of destruction. Elias trudged through the debris, his boots crunching against broken shards of metal and stone. His uniform was torn in places, and his face was smeared with dirt and soot. He had been part of a scouting mission to map the outskirts of a recently destroyed Tharka settlement. He had expected empty ruins, maybe some looters, but not what he found. In the midst of the twisted wreckage, a small whimper reached his ears. Elias paused, scanning the surrounding area. His heart skipped a beat. The sound was faint, almost imperceptible beneath the groaning of collapsing metal and the distant explosions still echoing from the battlefield. But it was there, a soft, trembling cry of fear and pain. He followed the sound cautiously, moving over fallen beams and twisted steel. When he reached the source, his breath caught. On the ground, partially hidden under the remnants of what looked like a collapsed wall, was a tiny Tharka child. She was no more than 5 by human standards, her large, luminescent eyes wide with terror. Her skin had a pale green hue, and her small limbs trembled violently. The child's small hands clutched at a piece of debris, as if it could somehow protect her. Her breathing was shallow and rapid, and a thin line of blood ran from a cut on her forehead. Elias felt a surge of conflicting emotions. She was an enemy by every definition, yet he could not bring himself to leave her there. Her vulnerability struck a chord deep within him. "Hey, it's okay," he whispered gently, keeping his hands visible and moving slowly. The child flinched at his voice but did not retreat. Her wide eyes held something that Elias could not name, fear, yes, but also a glimmer of hope. Slowly, he knelt down and reached out his hand. As his fingers brushed against her tiny shoulder, a strange, sudden wave of pain shot through his body. It was sharp and sudden, like a heavy weight pressing against his chest. Elias staggered slightly but caught himself. He realized almost immediately that it was not an ordinary pain. The child's fear, her pain, her exhaustion, it was flowing into him. He gasped, gripping his chest, but forced himself to stay calm. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said firmly. "I just want to help." The child looked at him with wide, unblinking eyes. Her trembling began to slow, though the wave of discomfort that coursed through him intensified. Elias bit his lip and took a slow, steadying breath. This was not just a child in need. This was something different, something extraordinary. Carefully, he scooped her up, cradling her small body against his chest. She was light, almost weightless, yet the sensations of her pain pressed down on him as if it were a physical burden. He gritted his teeth and forced himself to stand. The landscape ahead was dangerous. Fires burned on the edges of the wreckage, and crumbling structures threatened to collapse at the slightest disturbance. But Elias moved forward step by step, shielding the child as best he could. With every movement, every sound of the collapsing world around them, he felt her fear as if it were his own. Hours passed, though it felt like days. Elias found himself slipping into near exhaustion, but he could not stop. Every time he faltered, the child's small hands would clutch at his uniform, her trust in him a silent plea to keep going. He did not understand how or why, but he felt an unbreakable connection forming. Night began to fall over Kelara, the dark sky blotting out the dying sun. The fires of the ruins cast long, flickering shadows. Elias needed shelter, a place where the child could rest safely. He spotted the outline of an abandoned research station in the distance, partially hidden behind a collapsed communications tower. It was risky, but it was their only hope. As he approached the station, the first sounds of the night creatures of Kelara emerged, growls, hisses, and the scrape of claws against metal. Elias tightened his grip on the child. He could feel her tension, and with it, a surge of discomfort that made his knees weak. Still, he pressed on. Survival, he realized, was not just about him anymore. Finally, he reached the entrance of the station. The door hung crooked on its hinges, and the interior was dark and dusty. Elias stepped inside, carefully placing the child on the floor, making sure her head was cushioned by a piece of torn fabric he had found along the way. She curled into a small ball, shivering but safe for the moment. Elias leaned against the wall, closing his eyes. The pain had not stopped. It was still there, dull and persistent, like a shadow over his entire body. But he did not regret his choice. He had seen the child's eyes light up with recognition that he would not harm her, and that was enough. He would bear this pain, whatever it was, because it meant her survival. He spent the night in restless vigilance, sitting beside her as she finally began to drift into a fitful sleep. He had always thought of himself as a soldier, trained to fight and survive. But this was something entirely different. Protecting a life that was meant to be his enemy was harder than any battle he had faced. It required patience, endurance, and an unwavering commitment to doing what was right, no matter the cost. As dawn broke over the horizon, Elias watched the first rays of sunlight filter through the broken windows of the station. The fires outside had died down, leaving only smoke curling into the sky. The child stirred in her sleep, reaching up a small hand that brushed against his arm. The pain he felt from her presence surged again, but this time it was mingled with something softer, almost like warmth. He smiled faintly despite his exhaustion. "We'll be okay," he whispered, not entirely sure if he was speaking to her or reassuring himself. He knew the dangers that still lay ahead, the roving patrols of both humans and Tharka, the harsh environment of Kelara, and the unknown consequences of the strange bond he now shared with the child. Yet, in that quiet moment, Elias understood something important. Life was not defined by the sides in a war, nor by the labels of friend and enemy. It was defined by the choices one made, by the courage to stand up for the vulnerable, and by the willingness to bear the burdens of others without hesitation. The child Lyra murmured something in her alien language, a soft, musical sound that Elias could not understand. But the intent was clear. She trusted him, and that trust was worth more than any weapon, any strategy, or any victory in battle. Elias stood, lifting her carefully into his arms. They would continue their journey, step by step, through the broken world of Kelara. He did not know what awaited them, but he was determined to face it. For the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of purpose that went beyond survival or duty. He was a protector now, and he would endure anything to keep this child safe. The wind howled outside, carrying the scent of ash and smoke. The ruins of Kelara stretched endlessly before them, a reminder of the war that had shaped this world. But within the brokenness, there was also hope. In the quiet bond between a human and a small alien child, a new story was beginning. A story of compassion, courage, and the strength that comes from protecting those who cannot protect themselves. As they stepped back into the uncertain landscape, Elias tightened his grip on Lyra, feeling the familiar pulse of discomfort that reminded him of the weight he now carried. It was a strange and painful connection, but it was also a bridge between two worlds torn apart by conflict. And for the first time, he believed that perhaps, through small acts of care and courage, even the deepest wounds of war could begin to heal. The journey had only just begun. The morning light crept through the broken windows of the abandoned research station, casting pale streaks across the dusty floor. Elias sat cross-legged on the ground, keeping Lyra close against his chest. The child was awake now, her small green eyes blinking slowly as she studied the human beside her. She seemed cautious but not afraid, and that alone eased a weight in Elias' heart. He had spent the night watching over her, feeling the constant hum of her presence. The strange bond they shared was no less intense in the daylight. Every twitch of her fingers, every shiver, every soft whimper of discomfort sent a ripple through his body. It was exhausting, but he had grown used to it. He had no choice. Her safety had become his responsibility, and he would bear any cost for it. "Do you understand me?" Elias asked softly. He had begun speaking to her more deliberately now, trying to establish a rhythm, a way of communicating that transcended words. Lyra tilted her head, studying him with curiosity. Then she reached out a small hand and touched his cheek. The gesture was simple, yet it conveyed trust, a silent acknowledgement that she knew he meant no harm. Elias swallowed hard. "All right, let's try to eat something." "You must be hungry." He rummaged through the few supplies he had scavenged from the ruins of the station. There was little to work with, some preserved rations, a few scraps of synthetic food, and water, but it was enough for now. He handed her a small portion, and she accepted it tentatively, her eyes never leaving his face. As she ate, Elias watched her closely. She was small and fragile, yet there was a spark in her eyes that reminded him of the resilience of the Tharka people. He could see the remnants of fear in her posture, the way she flinched at sudden sounds, but he also saw a growing curiosity, a willingness to explore the world around her. That curiosity gave him hope. After breakfast, Elias led Lyra to a small corner of the station that was less damaged. He cleared a space with his hands and scattered some scraps of metal and wood. "Here," he said, "you can play with these, make something, anything you want." Lyra looked at him, her lips curling into what might have been the first smile he had seen from her. She picked up a piece of metal and began to tap it gently, creating soft, ringing sounds. Elias realized that even amidst destruction and danger, small moments of creativity and joy were possible. Hours passed. Elias taught her simple games, small tasks to occupy her hands and mind. He showed her how to stack debris into towers, how to fold scraps into shapes, and how to listen for distant sounds that might signal danger. She learned quickly, her small hands surprisingly dexterous. Each time she succeeded, Elias would smile and clap softly, careful not to startle her. But as the day wore on, he felt the bond intensify. Lyra's discomfort became more pronounced in certain moments, especially when she tried to move too quickly or when memories of the destruction around her seemed to resurface. Elias would feel sharp pangs in his chest and waves of dizziness, yet he refused to let them slow him down. Each time he reminded himself silently, protecting her was worth every ache, every strain. During the afternoon, a sound outside caught their attention. A low hum, mechanical and deliberate. Elia's heart tightened. Tharka patrols moved swiftly, and if they found Lyra, she would be taken immediately. He grabbed a few scraps of metal and a piece of old wire, creating a simple alarm system of sorts. A string stretched across the doorway that would rattle against the metal if anyone entered. It was crude, but it would give them precious seconds to react. Lyra watched him, fascinated. "What is this?" she asked, her voice small but clear. Elias smiled. "It's a warning. If someone comes in, we will know." She nodded slowly, her large eyes reflecting comprehension. She touched the string with a delicate finger, then looked back at him with a mixture of curiosity and admiration. The human was clever, and she was beginning to see him as more than just a protector, perhaps even as a teacher. As night approached, Elias prepared a small corner for sleep. He arranged the broken remnants of the station into a makeshift bed and wrapped Lyra in a thin cloth he had found. She rested her head against his shoulder, and he could feel her small body relax, a sign that she trusted him enough to rest. Yet the bond between them pulsed stronger at night. Every twitch, every sigh, every flicker of fear sent waves of sensation through him. He barely slept, but he remained vigilant. "Do you miss your home?" he asked softly, not expecting a reply. To his surprise, she nodded slightly. Her lips moved, producing sounds he could not understand. He smiled faintly, gently touching her shoulder. "It's all right. We'll find a way, little one." She leaned against him, and for a moment the weight of the world seemed to lessen. Over the next few days, Elias and Lyra fell into a rhythm. He scavenged for food and supplies, sometimes venturing out despite the risks. Each time he returned, Lyra would greet him with cautious excitement, her small hand reaching for his. They built small games to keep her entertained, teaching her simple human concepts and learning bits of her alien language in return. Through her eyes, Elias began to see the Tharka differently. They were not just enemies. They were people, children, parents, warriors, and dreamers, all caught in the same cycle of survival. He realized that the child's innocence was a bridge between their worlds, a reminder that even in war, life was sacred and precious. One morning, as Elias prepared a small meal, Lyra suddenly stiffened and looked toward the horizon. Her eyes widened and a sharp wave of pain shot through him. He recognized it immediately. The child had sensed something, perhaps a patrol or someone searching for her. He held her tightly, murmuring reassurances, feeling her tension as if it were his own. Hours later, distant footsteps echoed through the ruined landscape outside. Elias knew they were getting closer. He moved Lyra to a hidden alcove inside the station, shielding her behind a wall of debris. His mind raced, thinking of ways to protect her without escalating the situation. He remembered her small voice, the trust she had placed in him, and he knew he could not fail. The footsteps stopped outside, and a voice called in the alien language. Elias strained to listen, recognizing the tones of urgency and command. He realized with a jolt that someone was searching for Lyra, her mother, or perhaps other Tharka soldiers. The child pressed against him, trembling, and he felt the intensity of her fear surge through his body, making his head spin. He whispered softly, "It's okay, I'm here, nothing will hurt you." The words were simple, yet filled with conviction. Lyra's small hands gripped his arms, and for a moment the world outside ceased to exist. It was just the two of them, bound together by trust, courage, and an unspoken promise of protection. The searchers lingered, moving cautiously around the perimeter of the station. Ilias could hear them, could sense their presence, yet he did not panic. He had learned to endure, to absorb the child's pain without letting it overwhelm him. His mind focused on one thing alone, keeping Lyra safe. Hours passed, and eventually the searchers moved on, leaving only the distant echoes of their movements behind. Ilias exhaled a quiet sigh of relief, though he did not relax completely. He knew this was only the beginning. The Tharka would not stop searching for their child. And the bond between him and Lyra would continue to test him in ways he could not yet imagine. That night, as he watched her sleep, Ilias reflected on the journey so far. He had saved her from immediate danger, yes, but he had also taken on a burden that no human had ever carried before. The pain, the constant awareness of her suffering, was unlike anything he had known. Yet through it all, he felt a sense of purpose stronger than any battlefield victory. He was not fighting for territory or orders. He was fighting for life, for trust, for a future that could exist beyond hatred and war. Lyra stirred in her sleep, murmuring a soft sound that Ilias interpreted as a word of gratitude. He touched her gently, feeling a warmth in his chest that balanced the pain. It was fleeting, but it reminded him why he endured so much. Protecting her was not just a duty, it was a choice, a declaration that even in a world torn apart by conflict, compassion could survive. The days that followed were filled with small victories. Ilias taught Lyra to recognize safe paths through the ruins, to understand basic human gestures and words, and to take joy in simple tasks. She began to laugh occasionally, a sound so rare and beautiful in the desolate landscape that it lifted his spirits more than any victory ever could. Ilias also began to notice subtle changes in himself. The constant strain of the bond forced him to think in new ways, to anticipate danger before it arrived, and to act with patience rather than impulse. He had always been a soldier, trained to react quickly, but now he was learning to endure slowly, to carry a burden not his own, and to find strength in protecting another life. And through it all, Lyra was changing too. The fear that had once dominated her eyes began to soften. She reached out to him with small gestures of trust, a hand on his arm, a hesitant smile, or the way she allowed him to guide her through dangerous spaces. She was learning to see him not as an enemy, but as a guardian, someone who had risked everything for her safety. Ilias knew the peace they had found was temporary. The Tharka would not stop searching, and the war around them showed no signs of ending. But for now, in the quiet moments of shared trust and small victories, they had created a world where survival did not mean suffering alone. Together, they had begun to forge a bond that transcended fear, language, and even the boundaries of their species. As he settled in beside her that night, feeling the rhythmic rise and fall of her breathing, Ilias understood one simple truth. The path ahead would be difficult, and the trials would be many, but he would walk it with her. He would carry her pain, share in her fears, and protect her with every ounce of strength he possessed. For the first time, he believed that even in a world defined by war, trust and compassion could light a path forward. And as Lyra drifted into sleep, safe for now, Ilias allowed himself a rare moment of quiet hope. Their journey had only just begun, but together they were already stronger than the forces that sought to tear them apart. The morning on Kelara arrived with a cold wind that whistled through the ruined research station. Ilias stirred from his light sleep, careful not to wake Lyra. She had been asleep through the night, her small body curled against him in trust and comfort. Even now he could feel her presence, subtle but constant, sending faint ripples of sensation through him. The bond had become stronger over the past few days, and with it, the intensity of the pain he felt whenever she was in distress had also grown. He rose quietly and went to check the small stash of food and water he had collected. Supplies were limited, but he could manage a simple breakfast for both of them. He placed small portions on the floor and nudged Lyra gently. "Time to eat," he whispered, She blinked her large, luminous eyes and reached for the food, still sleepy but willing to eat. While she ate, Elias studied her carefully. Lyra had started to move with more confidence in the station, though she still flinched at sudden sounds or changes in light. Her curiosity was growing, and she often pointed at broken equipment, asking questions in her soft, musical language. Elias had begun to recognize a few of her words, and he answered patiently, teaching her simple human words in return. "Food," he said, holding a small piece of ration. Lyra repeated it, her pronunciation clumsy but earnest. He smiled faintly. Small victories, like teaching her a word or helping her feel safe, had become milestones for both of them. After breakfast, Elias decided they needed to move. The research station offered temporary shelter, but it was isolated and vulnerable. If Tharka patrols discovered them, they would have no time to react. He packed what little he had, scraps of metal, food rations, and a few basic tools. He picked Lyra up carefully, cradling her as he stepped out into the open landscape. The ruins stretched endlessly before them, jagged and unstable. Elias moved cautiously, every step calculated. Lyra's presence was constant in his mind, every small movement sending a ripple of sensation through him. It was tiring, but he had learned to channel the discomfort, letting it sharpen his focus rather than weaken him. As they walked, Lyra pointed at a distant tower of crumbling metal. Her eyes widened and she made a sound that indicated both awe and curiosity. Elias nodded, understanding. "Yes, that's tall, isn't it?" he said, encouraging her observation. Small moments like this mattered. They gave her a sense of normalcy and a chance to explore without fear. Hours passed as they navigated through the wreckage, and Elias began to notice the subtle effects of the bond in new ways. When Lyra became tired, he felt exhaustion in his limbs, a heaviness that mirrored hers. When she winced at pain, he felt a sharp sting in his chest. It was almost like carrying her as an invisible weight in addition to the physical burden. Yet he did not complain. Every ache reminded him of his purpose, to protect her, no matter the cost. Midday arrived, and they found a small cave-like shelter in the remains of a collapsed building. Elias settled Lyra on a pile of debris that he had cushioned with scraps of cloth. "Rest here," he said gently. She lay down obediently, closing her eyes. He sat beside her, keeping watch as she drifted into a light sleep. It was during this quiet that he first sensed them, the patrols. He had grown attuned to the subtle changes in the environment, the faint vibrations in the ground, the distant hum of engines. Tharka soldiers were near. His heart tightened, not out of fear, but out of concern for Lyra. If they discovered her, she could be taken away immediately. Elias stayed calm, reminding himself that panic would only endanger her. He scanned the area, using the cover of debris to remain hidden. The patrol moved slowly, scanning the terrain with disciplined precision. Elias felt Lyra stir beside him, sensing her fear in every tremor of her small body. The wave of discomfort hit him sharply, making his vision blur for a moment. He took a deep breath, grounding himself, and whispered, "It's okay. I'm right here." Hours stretched as the patrol passed nearby. Elias held his position, remaining perfectly still. Lyra's small fingers clutched at his arm, and he felt the pressure of her trust, the weight of her reliance on him. It was overwhelming, yet he drew strength from it. She needed him to endure, and he would not fail. When the patrol finally moved away, Elias allowed himself a quiet sigh of relief. He lifted Lyra gently, checking her for any signs of injury or distress. She was unharmed, but her small face showed lingering fear. He held her close, murmuring words of reassurance. "You're safe now. Nothing can hurt you while I'm here." She rested her head against his chest, and he felt a faint warmth that countered the pain. Over the next few days, Elias and Lyra continued to move cautiously across the ruined landscape. Elias taught her to recognize safe paths, to avoid unstable structures, and to listen for distant sounds that might signal danger. He also began to share small stories about humans, tales of courage, kindness, and survival. Lyra listened intently, occasionally repeating words in her alien language, trying to understand and connect. One afternoon, Elias noticed her hesitating near a broken bridge. She looked down at the gap and then back at him, uncertainty in her eyes. He knelt beside her, speaking gently. "It's okay. You can do it, step by step." He extended his hand, letting her feel the stability of his support. Slowly, carefully, she placed one foot forward, then another. Elias mirrored her movements, ensuring that every step was safe. When she reached the other side, she looked back at him and smiled, a small, triumphant smile that made the long days of struggle worthwhile. Yet the bond continued to challenge him. Each moment of Lyra's fear, pain, or fatigue sent waves through his body. Sometimes it felt unbearable, like carrying a weight that pressed against his very soul, but he never showed weakness. She needed him to be strong, and that strength was not just physical. It was patience, courage, and an unwavering presence. He had never known a responsibility like this, one that demanded not only action but the endurance of shared suffering. Late one evening, as they rested near the remains of a small observation tower, Elias noticed changes in Lyra's behavior. She was quieter than usual, her eyes scanning the surroundings with heightened caution. He realized that she could sense something approaching. The Tharka were coming. He tightened his grip on her, whispering, "We'll be ready, you're safe with me." The pain surged suddenly, stronger than before, pressing against his chest and limbs. He felt every flicker of her anxiety, every twinge of fear. His knees trembled, but he forced himself to remain calm, knowing that panic would only transfer to her. Through the night, they remained hidden. Elias listened to the distant sounds of movement, the mechanical hums of vehicles, and the careful steps of soldiers. Lyra slept lightly, occasionally stirring, and each time Elias felt the waves of her distress. He murmured reassurances, stroking her hair and holding her close. He did not know if the Tharka would find them, but he knew that as long as he endured, she would be protected. By dawn, the patrols had moved on. Elias allowed himself a brief moment of rest, leaning against the wall and closing his eyes. Lyra lay beside him, her small hand resting lightly on his arm. He could feel her heartbeat, a soft rhythm that brought comfort amidst the exhaustion. The bond was still intense, still painful, but it was also a source of connection, trust, and purpose. As they prepared to move again, Elias reflected on the journey so far. He had faced danger, endured pain, and navigated a world torn apart by war. Yet none of that compared to the responsibility he carried for Lyra. She was not just a child in need. She was a bridge between two worlds, a living reminder that even in conflict, compassion could endure. He taught her to climb, to navigate obstacles, and to recognize the signs of danger. Each lesson was small, yet vital. Each success brought a sense of accomplishment that went beyond survival. It was the shaping of trust, courage, and understanding. Lyra began to respond with gestures of her own, offering small smiles, tentative touches, and moments of laughter that lit up the desolate landscape. Despite the dangers, Elias felt a growing sense of hope. They had survived together this long, and he believed that with careful planning, patience, and unwavering commitment, they could continue to do so. The bond between them, though taxing, had created a partnership stronger than fear, mistrust, or the surrounding chaos. That evening, as they settled near a ruined building for the night, Elias looked down at Lyra and whispered, "We're in this together. No one can take that away." She reached up and touched his cheek, her small hand warm against his skin. In that moment, the pain he felt from the bond softened slightly, replaced by a profound sense of connection. Elias understood something fundamental then. Protection was not just about guarding life. It was about sharing burdens, enduring hardships, and giving oneself fully to another. And in protecting Lyra, he was discovering the depth of his own humanity, the courage, patience, and compassion that defined him not as a soldier, but as a guardian. As the stars emerged above the ruined landscape, Elias held Lyra close. He knew the challenges ahead would only grow greater, that the Tharka would continue their search, and that the bond between them would continue to test him. Yet he also knew that together, they were stronger than any force that sought to separate them. The journey had entered a new phase. They were no longer merely surviving. They were learning, growing, and forging a connection that could endure even the darkest nights of Kelara. And through it all, Elias remained steadfast, carrying the pain, sharing the burdens, and protecting the child who had become more than a responsibility. She had become a part of his heart. The day dawned cold and pale, the sun struggling to break through the thick clouds that hung over Kelara. Elias had settled Lyra in a small alcove of the ruined building, making sure she was comfortable and sheltered. For several days, they had moved cautiously, avoiding patrols and staying hidden in the scattered debris of the war-torn landscape. But today felt different. He could sense a shift in the air, a tension that seemed to hum beneath the surface. Lyra stirred beside him, her small body pressing against his side as if she could feel the same unease. Ilias could feel her fear radiating through the bond, a sharp wave that made his chest tighten and his muscles tense. He drew a slow, steadying breath. "It's okay," he whispered, more to reassure himself than her. "We can handle this." Hours passed and the subtle signs became clearer. In the distance, faint movement caught his eye, organized, disciplined, and purposeful. The Tharka were near and not just any soldiers. Ilias realized that they were looking for someone very specific. His heart tightened as he thought of the child he held, small and fragile, yet capable of drawing the attention of an entire army. As the patrols approached, Ilias knew there was little time to prepare. He had no weapons to defend himself beyond his resourcefulness and wit, but he did have the bond, the connection to Lyra that gave him insight into her sensations and fears. He adjusted his hold on her, feeling the familiar waves of her anxiety pressing into him, and whispered again, "I've got you. You're safe." The first Tharka scout arrived at the ruins, moving cautiously through the debris. Ilias held his breath, keeping Lyra as still and quiet as possible. Her small body trembled against him, and he felt the pain surge through his own. It was a sharp, electric kind of ache that shot down his spine and into his limbs, but he gritted his teeth and endured it. The child needed him to be strong. The scout paused, scanning the area with keen, luminous eyes. Ilias had seen Tharka soldiers in battle. They were precise, disciplined, and relentless. One wrong move could mean discovery, yet he did not panic. He had learned to move with patience, to read the signs, and to anticipate danger. Slowly, carefully, he shifted behind a broken wall, using the shadows to shield both himself and Lyra. Hours seemed to stretch into eternity as they waited. More patrols arrived, moving with a methodical rhythm. Ilias could feel Lyra's tension in every movement, and the waves of her discomfort pressed against him in increasing intensity. He gritted his teeth, holding her closer. This was no longer just about endurance. It was about absolute focus, about using every ounce of his will to protect her. Eventually, the searchers began to retreat, moving away from the immediate area. Ilias exhaled quietly, but his relief was short-lived. A low hum resonated across the ruined landscape, a sound that made his blood run cold. It was different from the patrols. He could feel it through the ground, through the vibrations in the air. The Tharka were not just soldiers anymore. Someone important was approaching. From the distance emerged a figure unlike any Ilias had seen before. The Tharka were tall and imposing, but this figure carried an aura of command, authority, and power. Ilias felt the weight of recognition, even from afar. It was Commander Zira, the mother of the child he held. She moved with confidence, her steps deliberate and unhesitating, scanning the ruins with sharp, luminous eyes. Her gaze seemed to pierce the very air, and Ilias felt the gravity of her presence pressing down on him. He adjusted Lyra in his arms, noticing her small fingers clutching at his uniform in both fear and curiosity. He whispered softly, "Stay calm. I won't let anyone hurt you." Lyra's breathing was rapid, and he could feel the surge of her fear through the bond, stronger than anything he had experienced before. His chest tightened, and a wave of dizziness passed over him, but he did not falter. As Commander Zira approached, Ilias stepped forward cautiously, keeping his hands visible. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said in the human language, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. "I've only tried to protect your child." Zira stopped, her eyes narrowing as she studied him. Ilias could feel her emotions radiating outward, anger, suspicion, and disbelief. She had trained her entire life for battle, for strategy, for command, yet she had never encountered a human willing to endure such suffering voluntarily for a Tharka child. The bond he shared with Lyra was evident, the evidence of his endurance unmistakable. "You carried her pain willingly," Zira said, her voice strong but tinged with awe. Ilias nodded. "Every moment I would do it again." He did not flinch under her gaze, though he could feel the pressure of her scrutiny pressing against him like a physical weight. Lyra stirred, sensing the tension in the air. She moved slightly, reaching toward Ilias, and he felt the wave of her trust and fear intermingle. He held her close, whispering words of comfort. "I've got you. Nothing will happen to you while I'm here." Zira took a cautious step forward, her eyes never leaving him. She could see the evidence of his endurance, the exhaustion etched in his face, the strain in his muscles, the way he moved even under the constant surge of her child's pain. It was more than she could have expected, and it challenged everything she had known about humans. "You are extraordinary," she admitted, her voice quiet now. Elias blinked, surprised by the unexpected acknowledgement. "I am just a human," he said softly. "But I could not leave her in danger. I could not abandon her." Zira's expression softened slightly as she regarded the child in his arms. Lyra looked between the two of them, her small eyes reflecting both curiosity and trust. She reached out a hand, touching the edge of her mother's armor, then returning to Elia's chest as if to confirm her own sense of safety. The bond between them, the trust, the protection, the endurance, was tangible, almost visible in the quiet tension of the moment. Elias knelt slightly, lowering Lyra to the ground while keeping her within his protective reach. "I've done nothing but try to keep her safe," he said, his voice calm and unwavering. "I will not harm her. I will not leave her vulnerable." Zira regarded him silently, the weight of her authority and experience evident in every line of her posture. She had trained her life to protect her child, yet this human had demonstrated a commitment, a strength, and a courage that transcended expectations. She could see the pain etched in his face, the subtle tremors of endurance, and the way he had borne her child's suffering as if it were his own. Finally, she spoke, her voice softening. "You have done what no Tharka could have expected of a human. You have earned my respect." Elias felt a flicker of relief, though he remained vigilant. He knew trust would not come easily, not in a world torn apart by war. But this acknowledgement was the first step toward understanding, toward a connection that might bridge the divide between their peoples. Lyra took a small step toward her mother, then paused, glancing back at Elias. He understood the silent question in her eyes. Could he truly let go even if it meant returning to her mother? He nodded gently, reassuring her. "I will always be here for you," he said softly, "no matter what." The bond between them pulsed faintly, a mix of lingering discomfort and warmth, a reminder that their connection could not be broken by distance or circumstance. Zira observed this, realizing that this human had not only protected her child but had also shared in her suffering, had endured the pain, and had never wavered. It was a courage and compassion that surpassed simple understanding. Zira reached out, her hands careful and deliberate to take Lyra into her own. The child paused briefly, then leaned forward, resting her small body against her mother. Elias felt the surge of her comfort, the easing of tension in the bond, and a faint sense of peace washed over him. "You have my gratitude," Zira said, turning back to Elias. "You have proven yourself worthy of trust. I would have doubted it, but you have shown me otherwise." Elias nodded, feeling a quiet sense of fulfillment. He had not sought recognition or reward. His goal had always been simple: protect Lyra, endure for her, and ensure her safety. Yet in this moment, he realized that his actions had accomplished more than survival. They had fostered understanding, trust, and the possibility of peace between two worlds. As the sun began to set over Kelara, casting long shadows across the ruined landscape, Elias, Lyra, and Zira stood together. The tension of the day slowly faded, replaced by a tentative sense of hope. The war still raged, and dangers remained, but for now there was a moment of connection, a fragile bond formed through endurance, trust, and unwavering compassion. Elias understood that the journey was far from over. The Tharka would not forget this child, and he would have to continue protecting her in ways he could not yet imagine. But the first step had been taken. He had survived, endured, and proven that courage and care could transcend fear, language, and the boundaries of war. Lyra looked up at him, her small face reflecting gratitude and affection. She reached for his hand, and he took it gently, feeling the faint warmth of her trust. The pain in the bond lingered, but it was now tempered by understanding, comfort, and shared purpose. For the first time, Elias felt that the impossible was possible. A human and a Tharka child, bound together by endurance, trust, and compassion, could survive and perhaps even thrive in a world torn apart by conflict. The journey ahead would be challenging, but together they had already proven their strength. As night fell and the stars appeared over the horizon, Elias looked at Zira, then down at Lyra, and finally out over the desolate landscape. The world was still broken, but hope had been planted in the unlikeliest of places. And in that hope he found a quiet resolve. No matter what came next, he would continue to protect her, share in her burdens, and endure for the life that depended on him. The morning sun cast soft light over Kelara, illuminating the jagged ruins that had become the backdrop of Elia's and Lyra's journey. After the encounter with Zira, the Tharka commander and mother of the child, a delicate balance had been established. Trust had begun to form where once there was only fear. Elias held Lyra close as they prepared to leave the ruined shelter, knowing that the world beyond awaited them with both danger and opportunity. Lyra, now more confident and curious, clutched at his hand as they stepped over broken debris. The bond between them had grown stronger than ever. Elias could feel her small heart racing with excitement and apprehension, the subtle waves of her emotions pressing gently against his chest. It was still exhausting, but it was different now, no longer just fear or pain, but a mixture of comfort, curiosity, and trust. Zira walked beside them, a calm presence that radiated authority and care. She had decided to accompany them for the time being, understanding that her child's safety and the human's endurance were intertwined in a way that neither could ignore. Elias remained cautious but grateful. Even a brief alliance could make the difference between life and death in the volatile world of Kelera. "Where are we going?" Lyra asked softly, her voice still small but more assured than before. Elias glanced down at her, smiling gently. "We'll find a safe place, somewhere away from patrols and danger," he explained. "Somewhere you can explore, learn, and be free." The journey was slow but steady. Elias led them carefully, choosing paths that offered cover while allowing for visibility of the surrounding terrain. He explained simple lessons to Lyra along the way: how to spot unstable structures, which sounds signaled danger, and how to move quietly over rubble. She absorbed every detail eagerly, her small mind grasping concepts with astonishing speed. Zira observed quietly, occasionally offering insights about the terrain from her own experience. Her presence was commanding, yet patient. Elias noticed how Lyra responded to her, leaning in when her mother spoke but glancing back at him for reassurance. The bond between human and child had not diminished. It had merely adjusted to include a third presence who now shared responsibility for her safety. As they moved, Elias felt the bond fluctuate with Lyra's emotions. When she became curious or excited, he sensed a lightness, a buoyancy that invigorated him. When she sensed danger or fatigue, the sharp pains returned, reminding him of the immense responsibility he carried. Yet he embraced it willingly, understanding that their connection was what allowed her to survive and thrive in such a harsh environment. By midday, they reached the edge of a canyon, its walls jagged but offering potential shelter. Elias led them down a narrow, winding path, carefully choosing footholds and ensuring each step was secure. Lyra's small hands gripped his arm as they descended, and he felt her growing confidence as she began to step with more assurance. At the bottom of the canyon, they discovered a small cavern, partially concealed by overhanging rock and shadow. Elias inspected it carefully, ensuring there were no unstable formations and that it could serve as a temporary refuge. Satisfied, he guided Lyra inside, helping her settle on a soft patch of dirt and stone. "This will be our safe spot for now," he explained. Lyra's eyes sparkled with understanding and relief. Zira nodded in approval, recognizing the practicality of the location. Elias allowed himself a rare smile. For the first time in many days, he felt a measure of security, a small, fragile peace in a world still defined by chaos. While Lyra explored the cavern cautiously, Elias and Zira spoke quietly, sharing observations and strategies. Zira revealed more about the Tharka's movements in the region, the reasons behind the patrols, and the challenges her people faced. Elias listened intently, absorbing every detail, understanding that knowledge was as important as endurance in keeping Lyra safe. Over the next several days, they established a routine. Elias taught Lyra more about human practices, simple tasks that gave her a sense of control and independence. She learned to gather small amounts of edible plants, to identify signs of approaching danger, and to navigate the terrain with increasing confidence. The bond between human and child was now complemented by the presence of her mother, who offered guidance, authority, and support. Each day brought small victories. Lyra's laughter echoed softly through the cavern as she mastered new skills. Her curiosity grew, and with it, her confidence. Elias felt the bond shift once more, the pain and strain still present but tempered by pride, joy, and the satisfaction of seeing her flourish. Zira watched with a mixture of gratitude and awe, recognizing the profound impact of this human's courage and patience. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Elias gathered Lyra and Zira near the cavern's entrance. The colors of the sunset painted the sky with soft oranges and purples, casting a calm glow over the landscape. Elias knelt beside Lyra, holding her hands gently. "You've grown so strong," he said softly. "I'm proud of you." Lyra smiled shyly, her large eyes shining. She pressed her small hand against his cheek, a gesture of affection and trust that made the sharp ache in his chest feel more like a connection than a burden. He realized then that their journey had transformed them all, not just Lyra, but himself and even Zira. Compassion, endurance, and trust had bridged divides that years of conflict could not. Zira stepped forward, her eyes meeting Elia's. "I have seen what no Tharka could imagine," she said quietly. "Your courage, your endurance, your willingness to bear her pain, these are qualities that define you as more than a soldier. You are her protector, her guardian, and for that you have my respect." Elias felt a warmth spread through him, mingled with the familiar pulse of the bond. He had not sought recognition, yet this acknowledgement carried weight. It confirmed that his actions, his choices to endure, to protect, and to care, had meaning beyond survival. They had created trust, understanding, and perhaps even a bridge between two worlds at war. As night fell, they settled in the cavern. Elias watched the stars emerge, reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. Lyra lay beside him, her small body relaxed and peaceful. Zira sat nearby, keeping watch, but there was a sense of calm that had not existed before. The war outside remained, but within this small haven, life and connection thrived. The days that followed were filled with quiet growth and learning. Elias taught Lyra to recognize and create small signs of safety, to improvise tools, and to observe the environment carefully. Zira contributed her knowledge of the Tharka and the broader world, offering insights that enhanced their survival and understanding. Together, they formed a small, self-sufficient unit, bound by trust, endurance, and mutual care. Through it all, the bond between Elias and Lyra remained central. The pain and discomfort he felt from her presence were now balanced by moments of warmth, pride, and joy. Each smile, each small achievement, and each expression of trust strengthened the connection, reinforcing the lessons of patience, courage, and unwavering commitment. One morning, Elias noticed a subtle change in Lyra. She moved with more confidence, exploring the cavern and surrounding terrain without fear. She laughed freely, a sound that resonated through the stone and echoed across the canyon. He felt the bond pulse with warmth, a reminder that endurance and protection had led to growth and freedom. Zira approached him quietly. "She trusts you completely now," she said, her voice soft but filled with authority. "Not just as a protector, but as someone who cares. You have given her something no one else could, a sense of safety and belonging." Elias nodded, feeling the familiar ache of the bond tempered by satisfaction. "I only did what anyone would do if they could," he said. "I couldn't leave her alone. She needed someone to bear her burdens, and I could." Zira smiled faintly, her eyes reflecting both respect and gratitude. "Few humans would have the courage, patience, and compassion to do what you have done," she admitted. "It changes everything. For her, for me, and perhaps even for the future between our peoples." As the sun rose higher, Elias gathered Lyra and Zira at the entrance of the cavern. The world beyond was still dangerous, but hope had taken root. He realized that their journey had created more than survival. It had fostered connection, trust, and understanding. Through endurance, compassion, and courage, they had built a fragile bridge between two worlds torn by conflict. Lyra looked up at him, her small hands gripping his arms. "Stay with me," she whispered, a simple request that carried the weight of trust, love, and dependence. Elias smiled, kneeling to meet her gaze. "Always," he replied softly. "I will always be here." Zira placed a hand on Elia's shoulder. "She is safe because of you," she said. "You have proven that strength is not measured by weapons or battles, but by endurance, compassion, and the willingness to bear the burdens of others." Elias felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had not sought glory, recognition, or reward. His only goal had been to protect a child, to endure her pain, and to ensure her safety. And through that simple, unwavering commitment, he had achieved something far greater, a connection that transcended fear, species, and war. As the day faded into night, the three of them sat together, watching the stars emerge above the canyon. The bond between Elias and Lyra pulsed gently, no longer just a source of discomfort, but a reminder of trust, growth, and shared purpose. Zira's presence reinforced the connection, a testament to the power of understanding and collaboration across divides. Elias reflected on the journey that had brought them here, from the ruined research station to the canyon, from fear and uncertainty to trust and hope. Every challenge, every wave of pain, every moment of endurance had led to this. A fragile peace, a living connection, and the knowledge that even in a world defined by war, compassion could endure. Lyra leaned against him, her small body relaxed, her eyes bright with trust and curiosity. Elias held her gently, feeling the pulse of the bond, the warmth of connection, and the quiet assurance that he had done what mattered most. He had protected her, shared her burdens, and given her a chance to thrive in a dangerous world. And in that moment, he understood something fundamental. Heroism was not measured by the battles fought, the enemies defeated, or the victories claimed. True heroism was found in the choice to endure, to care, and to protect those who could not protect themselves. In that, Elias had proven himself, not just a human soldier, but a guardian, a protector, and a friend. As the stars shone brightly above Kelera, Elias, Lyra, and Zira sat together in quiet harmony. The world outside remained uncertain, the echoes of war still present, but within this small corner of the canyon, hope had been cultivated. And that hope, fragile yet enduring, would guide them through the days to come. The journey was far from over, but Elias knew one thing with certainty. He would always bear her burdens, protect her with unwavering courage, and remain by her side. The bond they shared was unbreakable, formed through trust, compassion, and shared endurance. Together they had faced the impossible, and together they would continue to face whatever the future held. In the quiet of the night, with Lyra resting safely and Zira watching over them, Elias allowed himself a rare moment of peace. The journey had been long, the pain real, and the challenges immense. Yet through it all, he had discovered the true meaning of strength, courage, and humanity. And in protecting a child from a world defined by conflict, he had found a purpose that transcended war, fear, and even species. The stars above Kelera glimmered like distant promises, and Elias held Lyra close, feeling the warmth of her trust and the pulse of their bond. He understood now that no matter what dangers awaited them, they were not alone. They had each other, and that connection would carry them forward through every trial, every challenge, and every unknown horizon. And with that quiet certainty, Elias knew that he had truly fulfilled his purpose, not as a soldier, but as a protector, a guardian, and a human capable of enduring the impossible for the sake of another.